Hello my dear nerds, welcome to the video. I hope you all are doing great and I hope you've been enjoying our classes. In today's video, we'll be looking at Middle English poetry, starting with the chronicles, religious and didactic poetry, metrical romances, and finally the chivalric romances. But hold on folks, let me just quickly put on my Middle English hat. Hark, good fellows and fair maidens. Let us venture into the realm of early Middle English poetry, where the language doth twinkle like a newborn star in the night sky. Prepare to be whisked away to a time of change and transition, where old English's mighty reign doth yield to the rising dawn of a new era. In this merry land, where Saxons and Normans doth collide, the poets of yore did forge a path for English verse to flourish. 'Twas a time of linguistic fusion, where Old English and French embraced in a linguistic dance, like a lively ceilidh in a grand medieval hall. The rhyming chronicles, epic stories in verse. Get ready for a unique literary treat, my nerds. In this period, we are blessed with an abundance of chronicles written in verse that will blow your mind. These chronicles are known for their incredible stories, wild imagination, and a good number of them even have such a lively writing that it'll keep you hooked. First, let us acquaint ourselves with The Brute, a legendary tale by Layman. Step into the world of Layman, a monk from Gloucestershire, who penned the romance chronicle The Brute, also known as the Chronicle of Britain, in around 1205. This massive work, spanning 30,000 lines, is a reimagining of the Anglo-Norman Brut d'Angleterre by Twas, who in turn translated Geoffrey of Monmouth's Latin History of Britain. It is the first work in English to treat of the matter of Britain, that is, the legends surrounding Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And it was written at a time when English was nearly eclipsed by French and Latin as a literary language. If you ever choose to read this masterpiece, you better brace yourself for an adventure with Brutus, the founder of the British race and the great-grandson of the Trojan Aeneas. He arrives in England, establishes London, and becomes the ancestor of the earliest British kings. The poem may lack some excitement in its style, but it possesses a charming simplicity. Plus, it's a crucial marker of the transition from Old English to Middle English. Robert of Gloucester. History comes alive in rhyme. Let's travel to the year 1300 and meet Robert of Gloucester, an enigmatic figure known solely for his rhyming history. With influences from Layman, Geoffrey of Monmouth, and other chroniclers, he takes us on a journey through English history from Brutus to the year 1270. Expect some lively storytelling, rough but engaging meter, and longer lines compared to The Brute. This dude knows how to keep you entertained. Robert Manning, from Noah to the English Kings. Meet Robert Manning, also known as Robert of Brunn or Bourne, hailing from Lincolnshire. Around 1288, he joined a monastery and gifted us with his masterpiece, The Story of England. This epic begins with a deluge and traces the lineage of English kings back to Noah. Manning weaves together elements from Pierre de Langtoft's work and Wace's Brute, creating a captivating tale. The epic presents us with a chaotic Alexandrine verse with skillfully executed couplet rhymes and occasional surprises in the form of middle rhymes. But that's not all. Manning also blesses us with Handling Shin, a religious manual based on the French work Manuel de Pichis. In this 13,000-line poem, he delivers insightful sermons on the 10 Commandments, the 7 deadly sins, and the 7 sacraments. Expect lively anecdotes, keen observations, and an approximation to the octosyllabic couplet meter. Lawrence Minot, a poet with passion for Edward III. Introducing Lawrence Minot, a probable poet from around 1300s who takes the stage with his 11 political/battle songs. Published in 1795, these fiery and patriotic pieces celebrate the heroic exploits of Edward III. The poems are vigorously written in heavily alliterated rhyming verse. Minot's poems are bursting with raw poetic energy, and the meters will blow your mind. Get ready to feel the national pride. Now, let's look at religious and didactic poetry. The Omnilum. Let's talk about the Omnilum, written by a guy named Orm or Orman. Not much surprise there. Anyway, this was written at around 1200. And this thing is massive, man, like 20,000 lines long. It's all about religious sermons to some guy named Walter. But honestly, it ain't got much poetic merit. However, what's cool is the crazy attention to detail in the spelling, bro. The meter is interesting too, with a strict iambic rhythm, no rhymes, and alternating lines of 8 and 7 syllables. It's a linguistic treat crafted by the scholarly Orm. Though of little literary interest, it has great value to linguists. In this epic tome, he sought to eliminate ambiguity in language, providing an early guide to pronunciation and spelling. It is a poetic experiment that combines a moral message with a linguistic precision, like a juggling act performed by a master wordsmith. This is my favorite, The Owl and the Nightingale. Picture this: a poetic battle betwixt two feathered foes debating matters of love, music, and the nature of existence itself. With wit and charm, these avian adversaries engage in verbal combat, while you are left to marvel at the poetic prowess and the sheer delight of their banter. The Owl and the Nightingale, supposedly written by Nicholas of Guildford around 1250, is basically a long argument in verse between a nightingale who's all about enjoying life and an owl who's all wise and serious. Remember Oogway, guys? You could call it debate poetry. Of course, every debate must have a mediator, in this case that being Nicholas, the narrator who overhears the avian mudslinging match. Kapow! Lol, this kind of reminds me of epic rap battles of history. Ever heard of that channel? You guys have to check it out. Anyway, coming back to the poem. The Owl and the Nightingale is a pretty lively poem, and the argument in it, it gets pretty heated. It's written in rhyming octosyllabic couplets, which is more regular than most stuff back then. The Cursor Mundi. Moving on to the Cursor Mundi, written around 1320. Its Latin title means Runner of the World. This bad boy is a religious epic, almost 30,000 lines long, written in the northern dialect. The author divides the story into 7 stages and takes inspiration from both the Old and New Testaments. The scope of Cursor Mundi is considerable too, covering everything from the creation to the end of the world and the Day of Judgment. It begins like a sort of prototype to John Milton's Paradise Lost, recounting the war in heaven, the temptation of Eve in the Garden of Eden, and the subsequent fall of man. The Old Testament story is then followed by the account of Jesus' life in the Gospels. The meter is a step up with a tight grip on the octosyllabic couplet. Interesting fact, Cursor Mundi was a major source for the first edition of Oxford English Dictionary, as it was one of the major early texts to be published by the Early English Text Society. Yep, it exists. Richard Rolle of Hampole. Rhyming. This dude, Richard Rolle of Hampole, was a hermit from Yorkshire who wrote some prose and a few short poems. But the real deal is his long poem called The Prick of Conscience. It's based on Christian writings and explores the joys and sorrows of a person's life affected by good and evil. Ooh, heavy. Rolle's importance lies in the devotional prose he composed in the vernacular for women readers. The meter is almost like the octosyllabic couplet, with extensions and variations that sometimes resemble heroic verse. Finally, we have the alliterative poems. Ah, alliterative poems of Middle English literature, with the rhythmic repetition of consonant sounds that reign supreme. Prepare to be enthralled by the enchanting verses crafted with skill and artistry. We have got four kick-ass poems in the West Midland dialect. The chivalric romance Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, two homiletic poems called Patience and Purity or Cleanness, and an elegiac dream vision known as Pearl, all miraculously preserved in a single manuscript dated about 1400. We don't know who wrote them, but they all have a similar style, so maybe it's the same poet. And he is presumably called the Pearl poet. These poems are religious themed. Pearl is the standout. This exquisite poem, written in a highly alliterative style, delves into themes of love, loss, and spiritual contemplation. Delight in lines as you read the poem. Lines like, "In a garden that glistened with gems so gay," and "On a lily white lamb both lovely and small." There are some seriously beautiful passages in there. The meter is crazy complex with alliteration, 12-line stanzas, and intricate rhymes. Purity and Patience, though less impressive, have an intense energy and triumph that sets them apart. They are two alliterative poems of moral teaching. And finally, we've got Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, one of the coolest romances out there. A splendid tale of honor and chivalry where the alliterative prowess of the poet shines like a knight's gleaming armor. Marvel at the majestic lines such as, "The Green Knight in the green chapel was found, and Gawain, gayest of heroes, geared for the road." The meter is free-flowing, alliterative, and the rhyming stanzas can go up to 20 lines. It's a wild ride, bro. Alright, nerds. Now we have come to the most important and the most interesting segment of this topic, famous chivalric romances in Middle English. So this is a popular storytelling style in the high medieval and early modern Europe, especially among the fancy aristocrats. These stories are all about badass knights going on quests and having grand adventures. They're like superheroes, man, with all impressive heroic qualities. Chivalric romances are all about this idealized code of behavior, being loyal, honorable, and all that jazz. And let's not forget about courtly love. Yeah, that's a big theme too. The most famous chivalric romances are the Arthurian ones. There are romances that are not Arthurian as well. So the Arthurian ones are the ones where we follow the crazy adventures of Lancelot, Galahad, Gawain, and the rest of the Knights of the Round Table. There are some dope examples like Christian de Twas Lancelot from the late 12th century, the anonymous Sir Gawain and the Green Knight from the late 14th century, and Thomas Malory's prose romance from 1485. Another major source is the Lancelot Grail, also known as the prose Lancelot, the Vulgate cycle, or the pseudo-map cycle written in French. But hey, there are also other cool romances that don't have a connection to the whole Arthurian saga. We got King Horn, Robert the Devil, Ipomedon, Emar, Havelock the Dane, Roswal and Linian, Le Bon Florence of Rome, and Amadas, just to name a few. King Horn. Alright, let's talk about this Middle English chivalric romance called King Horn. It's from the 13th century and it's based on the Anglo-Norman romance of Horn from 1170. The story got retold in later romances and ballads, and it's considered part of the Matter of England. Now you would ask, what is the Matter of England? It's basically a term that scholars use, basically the 20th century scholars. They have given it to a loose corpus of medieval literature that in general deals with the locations, characters, and themes concerning England, English history, or English cultural mores. So we got our hero, Horn, who's the son of King Murray from Sudan, somewhere near Devon maybe. Unfortunately, Horn's parents get killed by those Saracens. Shit is rough. But don't worry, he and his 12 buddies set sail in a boat and end up in Brittany. They become part of the royal court of King Aylmer and spend some years there. That's where he grows up, becomes a man, and falls head over heels for the king's daughter, Rhymenhild. But life ain't easy, man. Horn has to defend the kingdom from invading Saracens. And you know what? The king, being a total jerk, banishes Horn to Ireland, accusing him of trying to take over the throne. But our dude Horn is not giving up. He shows his heroism once again in Ireland and even gets offered the king's daughter's hand in marriage. But he's like, nah, thanks, but no thanks. After some time, Horn goes back to Brittany, rescues Rhymenhild, and they live happily ever after. That's true romance right there. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Check it out, folks. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is an awesome Arthurian story written in Middle English back in the late 14th century. Some people think that the Green Knight is like the legendary green man from folklore, while others see it as a nod to Jesus. It's written in verses with alliteration, drawing inspiration from Welsh, Irish, English, and French tales of chivalry. This poem is a big deal in the romance genre and is still loved by many. The story goes like this. Sir Gawain, a knight of King Arthur's Round Table, takes on a challenge from this mysterious dude called the Green Knight. This dude dares any knight to strike him with an axe, as long as he gets a return blow in a year and a day. Gawain accepts, chops off the dude's head, and what do you know, the Green Knight picks up his head and reminds Gawain about their little appointment. As Gawain tries to keep his end of the bargain, he shows chivalry and loyalty until his honor gets tested by the lord and lady of the castle where he's staying. The poem survived in one manuscript along with three other religious narrative poems: Pearl, Cleanness or Purity, and Patience. All of them are believed to be written by the same person known as the Pearl poet or Gawain poet, since they're all in the same Northwest Midlands dialect of Middle English. Pretty cool, huh? L'Amour d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory. Okay, listen up, peeps. L'Amour d'Arthur, which means the death of Arthur, is a French collection of tales about the legendary King Arthur, Guinevere, Lancelot, and the Knights of the Round Table, all put together by Sir Thomas Malory. Malory took existing French and English stories about these characters and added his own stuff. This bad boy was first published in 1485 by William Caxton and is probably the most famous Arthurian literature in English. Even modern writers like T.H. White and Alfred Lord Tennyson took inspiration from Malory for their works. This book tells the epic legend of King Arthur, Queen Guinevere, and the badass knights on their quest for the Holy Grail. Malory used a French poem from the late 14th century as a base and threw in some extra material from other sources to make his English prose translation. In 21 books, the story covers everything from the founding of Arthur's kingdom and the creation of the Round Table to the crazy adventures of individual knights, the search for the Holy Grail, and the eventual downfall of Arthur and his kingdom. It's all right here, man. Oh, and by the way, this page we are on starts with "In the beginning of Arthur, after he was chosen king by adventure and by grace." Names and places are written in fancy red letters called rubrication. Malory goes on to describe Arthur marrying Queen Guinevere, and Arthur spills the beans to Merlin about how much he loves her. She is the daughter of King Leodegrance of the land of Cameliard, by the way. And he is the dude who has the round table that Arthur's dad gave him. Ah, juicy stuff, right? Despite all the craziness going on in Malory's time, people were still super into chivalry and their history. The adventures of Arthur's knights were like a shiny example of the noble values that were being threatened during the War of the Roses. Loyalty was becoming rare, man. In his story, Malory even compares the behavior of his characters to the contemporary nobility, and he criticizes the lack of appreciation for loyal service. You know, he was feeling that injustice real deep as he sat locked up in jail.